Hi everybody, my name is Emily and I am an assistant youth and teen librarian here at Fayetteville Public Library, and this is the second installment of the Reading Buddy Book Club for June, where we are reading The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. So the last place that we left Edward was at the bottom of the sea, so it feels like there's a lot left to happen. So let's go ahead and jump in. Get a comfy spot, grab a snack, and most importantly, grab your reading buddy. This is Big Blue, and let's jump in. Chapter 7. He told himself that certainly Aibileen would come and find him. This, Edward thought, is much like waiting for Aibileen to come home from school. I will pretend that I am in the dining room of the house on Egypt Street, waiting for the little hand to move to the 3 and the big hand to move to the 12. If only I had my watch, then I would know for sure. But it doesn't matter. She will be here very, very soon. Hours passed, then days, and weeks, and months. Aibileen did not come. Edward, for lack of anything better to do, began to think. He thought about the stars. He remembered what they looked like from his bedroom window. What made them shine so brightly, he wondered, and were they still shining somewhere even though he could not see them? Never in my life, he thought, have I been further away from the stars than I am right now. He considered, too, the fate of the beautiful princess that had become a warthog. Why had she become a warthog? Because the ugly witch turned her into one, that was why. And then the rabbit thought about Pellegrina. He felt, in some way, that he could not explain to himself, that she was responsible for what had happened to him. It was almost as if it was she, and not the boys, who had thrown Edward overboard. She was like the witch in the story. No, she was the witch in the story. True, she did not turn him into a warthog. But just the same, she was punishing him. Although for what, he could not say. On the 297th day of Edward's ordeal, a storm came. The storm was so powerful that it lifted Edward off the ocean floor and led him in a crazy, wild, and spinning dance. The water pummeled him and lifted him and shoved him back down. Help, thought Edward. The storm, in its ferocity, actually flung him all the way out of the sea, and the rabbit glimpsed, for a moment, the light of an angry and bruised sky. The wind rushed through his ears. It sounded to him like Pellegrina laughing. But before he had time to appreciate being above the water, he was tossed back down into the depths. Up and down, back and forth, he went, until the storm wore itself out, and Edward saw that he was beginning again his slow descent to the ocean floor. Oh, help me, he thought. I can't go back there. Help me. But still, down he went. Down, down, down. And then, suddenly, the great wide net of a fisherman reached out and grabbed the rabbit. The net lifted him higher and higher until there was an almost unbearable explosion of light, and Edward was back in the world, lying on the deck of a ship, surrounded by fish. "Hey, what's this?" said a voice. "Ain't no fish," said another voice, "that's for sure." The light was so brilliant that it was hard for Edward to see, but finally shapes appeared out of the night, and then faces, and Edward realized he was looking up at two men, one young and one old. "Looks like some toy," said the grizzled old man. He bent and picked Edward up, and held him by his front paws, considering. "A rabbit, I reckon. It's got whiskers, and rabbit's ears, or the shape of rabbit's ears, at least." "Yeah, sure, a rabbit toy," said the young man, and he turned away. "I'll take it home to Nellie. Let her fix it up and set it to rights. Give it to some child." The old man placed Edward carefully on a crate, positioning him so that he was sitting up and could look out at the sea. Edward appreciated the courtesy of this small gesture, but he was heartily sick of the ocean and would have been satisfied never to set eyes on it again. "There you go," said the old man. As they made their way back to shore, Edward felt the sun on his face and the wind blowing through the little bit of fur left on his ears. And something filled his chest, a wonderful thing. He was glad to be alive. "Look at that rabbit," the old man said. "Looks like it's enjoying the ride, don't it?" Yep," said the young man. In fact, Edward Tulane was so happy to be back among the living that he did not even take umbrage for being referred to as it. Chapter 8. On land, the old fisherman stopped to light a pipe, and then, with the pipe clenched between his teeth, he walked home, carrying Edward atop his left shoulder as if he were a conquering hero. The fisherman balanced him there, placing a calloused hand on Edward's back. He talked to him in a soft, low voice as they walked. "You'll like Nellie, you will," said the old man. "She's had her sadness, but she's an all right girl." Edward looked at the small town blanketed in dust. A jumble of buildings huddled together, the ocean stretching out in front of it all. And he thought that he would like anything and anybody that was not at the bottom of the sea. "Hello, Lawrence," called a woman from the front of the shop. "What have you got?" "Fresh catch," said the fisherman. "Fresh rabbit from the sea." He lifted his cap to the lady and kept walking. "There you are now," said the fisherman. He took the pipe out of his mouth and pointed with the stem of it at a star in the purpling sky. "There's your North Star right there. Don't never have to be lost when you know where that fellow is." Edward considered the brightness of the small star. "Do they all have names?" he wondered. "Look at me," said the fisherman, "talking to a toy. Oh well, here we are then." And with Edward still on his shoulder, the fisherman walked up a stone-lined path and into a little green house. "Look here, Nellie," he said, "I brought something from the sea." "I don't want nothing from the sea," came a voice. "Aw, now, don't be like that, Nell. Come and see, then." An old woman stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. When she saw Edward, she dropped the apron and clapped her hands together and said, "Oh, Lawrence, you brung me a rabbit." "Direct from the sea," said Lawrence. He took Edward off his shoulder and stood up on the floor and held on to his hands, and made him take a deep bow in the direction of Nellie. "Oh," said Nellie, "here." She clapped her hands together again, and Lawrence passed Edward to her. Nellie held the rabbit out in front of her and looked him over from tip to toe. She smiled. "Have you ever in your life seen anything so fine?" she said. "She's beautiful," Nellie breathed. Edward felt immediately that Nellie was a very discerning woman. "She's beautiful," breathed Nellie. For a moment, Edward was confused. Was there some other object of beauty in the room? "What will I call her?" "Susanna?" said Lawrence. "Just right," said Nellie. "Susanna." She looked deep into Edward's eyes. "First off, Susanna will need some clothes, won't she?" Chapter 9. And so Edward Tulane became Susanna. Nellie sewed several outfits for him, a pink dress with ruffles for special occasions, a simple shift fashioned out of the flower-covered cloth for everyday use, and a long white gown made of cotton for Edward to sleep in. In addition, she remade his ears, stripping them of a few pieces of fur that remained, and designing him a new pair. "Oh," she told him when she was done, "you look lovely." He was horrified at first. He was, after all, a boy rabbit. He did not want to be dressed like a girl. And the outfits, even the special occasion dress, were so simple, so plain, they lacked the elegance and artistry of his real clothes. But then Edward remembered lying on the ocean floor, the muck of his face and the stars so far away, and he said to himself, "What difference does it make, really? Wearing a dress won't hurt me." Besides, life in this little green house with the fisherman and his wife was sweet. Nellie loved to bake, and so she spent her day in the kitchen. She put Edward on the counter, and then leaned him up against the flour canister and arranged his dress around his knees. She bent his ears so that he could hear as well. And then she set to work, kneading dough for bread and rolling out dough for cookies and pies. The kitchen soon filled with the smell of baking bread and with the sweet smells of cinnamon and sugar and cloves. The windows steamed up, and while Nellie worked, she talked. She told Edward about her children, her daughter Lolly, who was a secretary, and her boys, Ralph, who was in the army, and Raymond, who had died of pneumonia when he was only 5 years old. "He drowned inside himself," said Nellie. "It is a horrible, terrible thing, the worst thing, to watch somebody you love die right in front of you, and not be able to do nothing about it. I dream about him most nights." Nellie wiped at her tears with the back of her hands. She smiled at Edward. "I suppose you think I'm daft, talking to a toy, but it seems to me that you are listening, Susanna." And Edward was surprised to discover that he was listening. Before, when Aveline talked to him, everything had been so boring, so pointless. But now, the stories that Nellie told struck him as the most important thing in the world, and he listened as if his life depended on what she said. It made him wonder if some of the muck from the ocean floor had gotten inside his china and damaged him somehow. In the evening, Lawrence came home from the sea, and there was dinner, and Edward sat at the table with the fisherman and his wife. He sat in an old wooden high chair, and while at first he was mortified, a high chair, after all, was a chair designed for babies, not for elegant rabbits. He soon became used to it. He liked being up high, looking out over the table instead of staring at the tablecloth, as he had at the Tulane house. He liked feeling like a part of things. Every night after dinner, Lawrence said that he thought he would go out and get some fresh air and that maybe Susanna would like to come with him. He placed Edward on his shoulder as he had the first night when he walked him through town, bringing him home to Nellie. They went outside, and Lawrence lit his pipe and held Edward there on his shoulder, and if the night was clear, Lawrence said the names of the constellations one at a time. Andromeda, Pegasus, pointing at them with the stem of his pipe. Edward loved looking up at the stars, and he loved the sounds of the constellation names. They were sweet in his ears. Sometimes, though, staring up at the night sky, Edward remembered Pellegrina, saw again her dark and glowing eyes, and a chill would go through him. Warthogs, he would think, witches. But Nellie, before she put him to bed each night, sang Edward a lullaby. A song about a mockingbird that did not sing, and a diamond ring that would not shine, and the sound of Nellie's voice soothed a rabbit, and he forgot about Pellegrina. Life, for a very long time, was sweet. And then Lawrence and Nellie's daughter came for a visit. Chapter 10. Lolly was a lumpy woman who spoke too loudly and who wore too much lipstick. She entered the house and immediately spotted Edward sitting on the living room couch. "What's this?" she said. She put down her suitcase and picked Edward up by one foot. She held him upside down. "That's Susanna," said Nellie. "Susanna!" shouted Lolly. She gave Edward a shake. His dress was up over his head and he could see nothing. Already he had formed a deep and abiding hatred for Lolly. "Your father found her," said Nellie. "She came up in the net and he didn't have no clothes for her, so I made some dresses." "Have you got skivvy?" shouted Lolly. "Rabbits don't need clothes." "Well," said Nellie, her voice shook. "This one seemed to." Lolly tossed Edward back on the couch. He landed face down with his arms over his head and his dress still over his face, and he stayed there all the way through dinner. "Why have you got out that old high chair?" shouted Lolly. "Oh, don't pay it no mind. Your father was just gluing on the missing piece. Wasn't you, Lawrence?" "That's right," said Lawrence without looking up from his plate. Of course, after dinner, Edward did not go outside and stand beneath the stars to have a smoke with Lawrence, and Nellie, for the first time since Edward had been with her, did not sing him a lullaby. In fact, Edward was ignored and forgotten until the next morning, when Lolly picked him up again and pulled his dress down away from his face and stared him in the eye. "Got the old folks bewitched, don't you?" said Lolly. I heard the talk in town, that they've been treating you like a rabbit child." Edward stared back at Lolly. Her lipstick was a bright and bloody red. He felt a cold breeze blow through the room. Was a door open somewhere? "Well, you don't fool me," she said. She gave him a shake. We'll be taking a trip together, you and me." Holding Edward by the ears, Lolly marched into the kitchen and shoved him face down in the garbage can. "Ma," Lolly shouted, "I'm taking the truck. I'm going to head out and do some errands." "Oh," came Nellie's tremulous voice. "That's wonderful, dear. Goodbye, then." "Goodbye," thought Edward as Lolly hauled the garbage can out to the truck. "Goodbye," Nellie called again, louder this time. Edward felt a sharp pain somewhere deep inside his china chest. For the first time, his heart called out to him. It said 2 words: Nellie, Lawrence. Chapter 11. Edward ended up at the dump. He lay on top of orange peels, coffee grounds, rancid bacon, and rubber tires. The first night, he was at the top of the garbage heap, and so he was able to look up at the stars and find comfort in their light. In the morning, a short man came climbing through the trash and rubble. He stopped when he was standing on top of the highest pile. He put his hand under his armpits and flapped his elbows. The man crowed loudly. He shouted, "Who am I? I'm Ernest. Ernest, who is king of the world." "How can I be king of the world? Because I am king of garbages, and garbages is what the world is made of. Ha ha ha! Therefore I am Ernest. Ernest, who is king of the world," he crowed again. Edward was inclined to agree with Ernest's assessment of the world being made of garbage, especially after his second day at the dump, when a load of trash was deposited directly on top of him. He lay there, buried alive. He could not see the sky. He could not see the stars. He could see nothing. What kept Edward going, what gave him hope, was thinking of how he would find Lolly and exact his revenge. He would pick her up by the ears. He would bury her under a mountain of trash. But after almost 40 days and nights had passed, the weight and the smell of the garbage above and below him clouded Edward's thoughts, and soon he gave up thinking about revenge and gave in to despair. It was worse, much worse, than being buried at sea. It was worse because Edward was a different rabbit now. He couldn't say how he was different. He just knew that he was. He remembered again Pellegrina's story about the princess who had loved nobody. The witch turned her into a warthog because she loved nobody. He understood that now. He heard Pellegrina say, "You disappoint me." "Why?" he asked her. "Why do I disappoint you?" But he knew the answer to the question. It was because he had not loved Aveline enough, and now she was gone from him, and he would never be able to make it right. And Nellie and Lawrence were gone too. He missed them terribly. He wanted to be with them. The rabbit wondered if that was love. Day after day passed, and Edward was aware of time passing only because every morning he could hear Ernest performing his dawn ritual, cackling and crowing about being king of the world. On his 118th day at the dump, salvation arrived for Edward in a most unusual form. The garbage around him shifted, and the rabbit heard the sniffing and panting of a dog. Then came the frenzied sound of digging. The garbage shifted again, and suddenly, miraculously, the beautiful, buttery light of late afternoon shone on Edward's face. Chapter 12. Edward did not have much time to savor the light, for the dog suddenly appeared above him, dark and shaggy, blocking his view. Edward was pulled out of the garbage by his ears, dropped, and then kicked up again, this time around the middle, shaken back and forth with a great deal of ferocity. The little dog growled deep in its throat and then dropped Edward again, looked him in the eye. Edward stared back. "Hey, get out of here, you dog!" It was Edward, king of the garbages, and therefore king of the world. The dog grabbed Edward by his pink dress and took off running. "That's mine! That's mine! All garbage is mine!" Ernest shouted. "You come back here!" But the little dog did not stop. The sun was shining, and Edward felt exhilarated. Who, having known him before, would have thought that he could be so happy now, crusted over with garbage, wearing a dress, held in a slobbery mouth of a dog, and being chased by a madman? But he was happy. The dog ran and ran until they reached the railroad track. They crossed over the tracks, and there, underneath a scraggly tree and a circle of bushes, Edward was dropped in front of a large pair of feet. The dog began to bark. Edward looked up and saw that the feet were attached to an enormous man with a long, dark beard. "What's this, Lucy?" said the man. He bent and picked up Edward. He held him firmly around the middle. "Lucy," said the man, "I know how much you enjoy rabbit pie." Lucy barked. "Yes, yes, I know. Rabbit pie is a true delight, one of the pleasures of our existence." Lucy let out a hopeful yip. "But what we have here, what you have so graciously delivered to me, is definitely a rabbit, but the best chef in the world would be hard-pressed to make him into a pie." Lucy growled. "This rabbit is made of china." The man held Edward closer to him. They looked each other in the eye. "You're made of china, aren't you, Malone?" He gave Edward a playful shake. "You're some child's toy, am I right? And you have been separated somehow from the child who loves you." Edward felt, again, the sharp pain in his chest. He thought of Aileen. He saw the path leading up to the house on Egypt Street. He saw the dusk descending and Aileen running toward him. Yes, Aileen had loved him. "So, Malone," said the man. He cleared his throat. "You were lost. That is my guess. Lucy and I are lost, too." At the sound of her name, Lucy let out another yip. "Perhaps," said the man, "you would like to be lost with us. I have found it much more agreeable to be lost in the company of others. My name is Bull. Lucy, as you may have surmised, is my dog. Would you like to join us?" Bull waited for a moment, staring at Edward, and then with his hand still firmly around Edward's waist, the man reached up one enormous finger and touched Edward's head from behind. He pushed it so it looked as if Edward were nodding his head in agreement. "Look, Lucy, he's saying yes. Malone has agreed to travel with us. Isn't that swell?" Lucy danced around Bull's feet, wagging her tail and barking. And so it was that Edward took to the road with a hobo and his dog. Chapter 13. They traveled on foot. They traveled in empty rail cars. They were always on the move. "But in truth," said Bull, "we're going nowhere. That, my friend, is the irony of our constant movement." Edward rode in Bull's bedroll, slung over Bull's shoulders with only his head and ears sticking out. Bull was always careful to position the rabbit so that he was not looking down or up, but was instead forever looking behind him at the road they had just traveled. At night, they slept on the ground under the stars. Lucy, after her initial disappointment about Edward being unfit for consumption, took a liking to him and slept curled up beside him. Sometimes she even rested her muzzle on his china stomach, and then the noises she made in her sleep, whimpering and growling and chuffing, resonated inside Edward's body. To his surprise, he began to feel a deep tenderness for the dog. During the night, while Bull and Lucy slept, Edward, with his ever-open eyes, stared up at the constellations. He said their names, and then he said the names of the people who loved him. He started with Aileen, and then went to Nellie and Lawrence, and from there, Bull and Lucy. And then he ended with Aileen. Aileen, Nellie, Lawrence, Bull, Lucy, Aileen. "See," Edward told Pellegrino. "I am not like the princess. I know about love." There were times, too, when Bull and Lucy gathered around a campfire with other tramps. Bull was a good storyteller and even a better singer. "Sing for us, Bull," the men shouted. Bull sat with Lucy leaning against his leg, and Edward balanced on his right knee, and he sang from somewhere deep inside himself, just as Edward could feel Lucy's whimpers and growls resonate through his body at night. He could also feel the deep, sad sound of Bull's songs move through him. Edward loved it when Bull sang. And he was grateful to Bull, too, for sensing that a dress was not the right kind of clothing for Edward. "Alone," said Bull one night, "it is not my desire to offend you or to comment negatively on your choice of garb, but I'm forced to tell you that you stick out like a sore thumb in that princess dress. And also, again, with no wish to offend you, the dress has seen better days." Nellie's beautiful dress had not fared well at the dump, or in its consequent ramblings with Bull and Lucy. It was so torn and dirty and full of holes that it barely resembled a dress anymore. "I have a solution," said Bull, "and I hope that it meets with your approval. He took his own knit stocking cap and cut a big hole in the top of it, and 2 small holes on the side of it, and then he took off Edward's dress. "Look away, Lucy," he said to the dog. "Let's not embarrass Malone by staring at his nakedness." Bull slid the hat over Edward's head and pulled it down and poked his arms through the small holes. "There you go," he said to Edward. "Now you just need some pants." The pants Bull made himself, cutting up several red handkerchiefs and sewing them together so that they formed a makeshift covering for Edward's long legs. "Now you have a proper outlaw look," said Bull, standing back to admire his work. "Now you look like a rabbit on the run." And that is the end of our second installment of The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane by Kate DiCamillo. I hope you enjoyed that video, and we will be back for a third installment next Sunday, same time, same place. I'll see you guys then. Bye!